This project is about so much more than just a dress. It's about exploring the iconic style of Wednesday Addams, the history of tatting, and the joy of combining vintage techniques with modern fashion. I know, black dresses are notoriously difficult to film for sewing vlogs. I'm doing it anyway. I assure you, the dress is the least interesting part of this project, or at least that's my hope. I've had the idea of a Wednesday Addams homage for over a year now. I'm not going to say cosplay because trying to decide which generation of Wednesday would not only be a pain in the butt, but also tracking down the right fabric, etc. The fabric I'm using is a machine embroidered cotton gauze I picked up on clearance, and it's currently covered in cat hair because everything in this house is covered in cat hair. I'd really like to thank my monthly supporters on Patreon and channel memberships because you help fund projects like experimenting with fabric like this. If you'd like to become a member of the Craft Coven, there's a link to Patreon in the video description, and channel memberships are hanging out where you can boop the like button or subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. No worries if membership isn't your kind of thing, I'd just like to thank you for being here. Now, believe it or not, these are the leftovers. I bought enough to also make a top if I want one, and I want one. This is really interesting fabric. For those of you who are going to say I destroyed it in the wash, it was already kind of waffle patterny when I bought it. I like the texture, and while cotton gauze is supposed to be light and breezy, this is thick and looks kind of warm and substantial, comparatively speaking. If we bring it down to bare bones, the generic Wednesday Addams dress is a shirtwaist. Shirtwaist dresses have kind of been a thing recently. I debated making a Nicole dress by Sew Over It, but after playing with the pattern a bit and remembering how Ashley Main had so many issues with it, I decided to go with something a bit more modern and plus-size friendly. After all, I'm already breaking the mold by being a middle-aged plus-size adult. Honestly, seeing as multiple Addams Family TV series have had their own spins on Wednesday's look, I can afford to do the same. Because unlike all those other versions of Wednesday Addams, I'm a real person who doesn't live in a little glowing box. Well, nuts. I chose the Jenna Dress from Closet Core Patterns because it's relatively simple. Make a shirt, slap a panel skirt on it. Right up my alley. I somehow doubt anything with a color technically classifies as simple, but considering there are no darts or bust shaping or need to do any adjustments, I'm fine. And when I compare my measurements to the finished garment measurements, a 2X should fit quite well. Considering the pattern goes up to a 4X, there's some room for body diversity here. What usually screams Wednesday Addams to me, and to most folks I think, is the extremely iconic white dagger point collar. As it just so happens, I have found a tatting pattern from 1867's Pearl Tatting book by Eleanor Riego de la Brochardrière that fits the bill. It's called the Shakespeare Collar and Cuffs, and it must have been pretty popular because it shows up again in a lace tatting pamphlet from 1886. So that's what we're making this week. A tatted collar from a pattern that's almost 160 years old, and a dress to hang it on. Well, let's get to it. Now, I really can't say much about constructing the dress. Well, I can say it, I just can't show it. It's black, and the problem with darkness is, it's also black. So I have footage of putting this dress together, but it's just me moving a mass of dark fabric from one place to the next. Get used to this because there's another black hole project planned for the near future, and once again, I think it's a project that'll be made chef's kiss by the accessories. I've made a few projects with collar stands. The Garibaldi blouse I turned into a dress is one, the Edwardian shirtwaist I've made as both a blouse and a dress is another. The latter has a detachable collar you can bolt onto it, and that was my original plan for this project. And then I made the Enid dress and realized I don't like it all that much. And that's why we make mock-ups, folks. Use bed sheets or less expensive fabric and find out if it's something you'll wear. I may be able to make the pink shirt dress into something I will wear down the line. Besides, it's too big for me now. But I'm getting sidetracked. What I'm trying to say is, I think this was my first time making a fully collared traditional shirt. Not something that had a collar as a decoration like the Asteria dress, or something that ends in a stand like the Garibaldi or the Edwardian blouse. The directions are okay, but I'm not sure I like them. There was a lot of sewing something together, then rolling fabric out of the way to sew around it, and I just got the feeling there could have been an easier way to do it. That said, the collar came out okay. There's got to be an easier way to do the stand, though. The sleeves and the cuffs were another sticky point. The sleeves have a tower placket, which I never deal well with, and again, the instructions for the cuffs seemed kind of convoluted. So I looked up a tutorial on tower plackets online, which is what I usually do when confronted with one of these monstrosities, and did my own thing for the cuffs. Did I film any of this? Debatable. One thing the dress was full on missing was pockets. Okay, there's a chest pocket, but I very quickly got rid of that particular adornment. Couple of reasons. It would be purely decorative and detract from the collar, and I tried it and sewed it on sideways. So I removed it. Were there any side seam pockets? No. This is the kind of dress huge side seam pockets are made for. I, once again, busted out my huge ginormous pocket that's a mashup between the Coquelicot skirt pockets with a Helen's Closet pocket. If middle-aged plus-size Wednesday wants to bring a nice Merlot to the party, she now has a place to carry it. Pockets of holding are go. If you plan to make the Jenna dress and don't happen to have a huge enormous pocket pattern piece lying around, or any pocket pattern whatsoever, I recommend my friend Ashley Main's Perfect Pocket Pattern. I'll have links to it in my description. You can purchase it for an extremely reasonable price from either Etsy or her Ko-fi account. So now we have a dress, which took me 3 days to make over the weekend while I watched Practical Magic, a variety of films based off Stephen King novels, and went back to re-watch, or maybe re-listen, considering I was concentrating on black thread on black fabric, of Stranger Things. Onto the collar. So, who is Wednesday Addams? To most of us who grew up with the Addams Family on TV reruns or the movies starring Angelica Houston, Raul Julia, and Christina Ricci, she's probably the original 20th century goth girl. Black hair, mortuary tan, deadpan sense of humor. You may notice I didn't say she was the absolute original goth girl. I wager the worlds of moving pictures and art history are just filthy with them, and someone who didn't drop out of art college after second year would be chomping at the bit to wave a JPEG under my nose to prove me wrong. First rule of Craft Coven, cover thine butt. Considering the goth subculture has been kicking around since the late 70s or early 80s at very least, and Susie Sue has been the quintessential goth icon since that time, to say Wednesday is the modern gothy embodiment is contentious at best. But who is Wednesday Addams really? Where do any of the Addams family come from? And for those who aren't aware, what is this goth thing I'm referring to? To really answer that, we have to go back a bit in time, to at least the 1930s. The Addams family were the brainchild of cartoonist Charles Samuel Addams, who, before the Addams family took off, was probably best known for creating single-panel comics for the New Yorker magazine. Probably the best way to describe this sort of comic is an illustration of something absurd, possibly with a punchline. I don't know who the most current master of this art form is, but when I was growing up it was Gary Larson and the Far Side comics, where you'd have a single panel with, say, dogs playing a rousing game of tether cat, or a rocket scientist working on something dangerous while his co-workers prepare to burst an inflated paper bag behind him. Where Larson's work delved heavily into the relationships between man, nature, and various domesticated animals, Addams employed a sense of the macabre. Chill Addams, as he was apparently known, though I've also seen references to Chaz and Charlie, came by the tendency naturally. Most of the sources I found mentioned he was a kid with a morbid, macabre sense of humor, tempered with an abundance of whimsy. It shows in his works. In one panel we follow two skiers, one of whom looks confused because the tracks of the guy in front show up on both sides of an oncoming tree. Or a secretary spotting a group of tiny musicians climbing a rope ladder into a speaker labeled Muzak. Or, closer to the themes of the Addams family, a woman talking to her husband whose reflection doesn't show up in the mirror behind him. The punchline? Is something wrong, Robert? You've been acting so strange lately. I'm sorry, ma'am. Robert is gone, but his spirit lingers on, if you know what I mean. At one point, Addams was in talks with his friend Ray Bradbury in regards to illustrating a book of vampire stories. Both of them seem to have the idea of a family of misfits around the same general time. Bradbury eventually compiled his short stories about the Elliot family into an anthology woven together with a through line in From the Dust Returned, which is now on my reading list. Addams was sidetracked by his own little family. A witchy wife, her swarthy husband, their 2 children, the butler, reminiscent of Frankenstein's monster, a grandmother, and an uncle for the children. The family we would eventually come to know as the Addams family. The comic version of the Addams family was a study in contrasts as a family with a love of the macabre, often butting heads with the normal everyday world around them. A cartoon that eventually came to life as the opening scene of 1991's The Addams Family shows a group of carolers singing in front of the iconic Addams family home, with the family up on the central tower's mansard roof preparing to douse them with the contents of a boiling cauldron. That house. I'm a total slut for a dramatic Second Empire mansard roof. There's nothing quite like a well-placed set of dormers. Apparently the house was based off the Victorian architecture of Addams' hometown of Westfield, New Jersey, where he used to spend a lot of time in the local cemetery. I used to do the same thing as a kid. It's a great place to just get a little alone time. Very quiet. The Addams family members didn't even have names until a TV show was pitched in the early 1960s. Addams worked collaboratively with the production to ensure it would retain the flavor of his creation, from names to notes on the characters' personalities. It would go on to star John Astin as Gomez, Carolyn Jones as Morticia, Lisa Loring as a very young Wednesday, and former child star Jackie Coogan as Uncle Fester. Loring's Wednesday was young. The actress was around 6 or 7 years old during the show, and as such, the role was that of a child. There's some personality, but it's mostly just a child's reaction to normal people not understanding their family dynamic. She's the prototype to what Wednesday will become. Her doll, for instance, doesn't have a head, but she explains that to the outsider visiting the house by calling the doll Marie Antoinette. The visitor is a truant officer come to make sure the children go to the local public school. The doll is a clever device to show that not only is this child a little strange, but she does have some education, even if it's homeschooled. How many 6-year-olds do you know with a knowledge of Marie Antoinette and her severed head? It wasn't until 1991's The Addams Family and 1993's Addams Family Values that the character of Wednesday leans heavily into the morbid. Christina Ricci's Wednesday is sullen and dry of wit. She gets her excitement from staging gory Shakespearean swordplay with her brother when she's not hooking him up to various electrical outlets or chasing him with medieval weaponry. In the second movie, she turns her deadpan humor and historical ingenuity on the summer camp to which she and her brother Pugsley have been banished. And I've only just realized how much of my own personality comes from Wednesday Addams, and possibly B. Arthur. The next 30 years are going to be interesting times. 2022's Wednesday, showrun by Tim Burton, carries on in the same vein as the 1990s movies. Jenna Ortega's Wednesday is a logical progression from Ricci's. There have been other TV and cartoon versions in the meantime, but a lot of the rights involving the creepy, kooky, mysterious, and spooky family were allegedly tied up by one of Addams' former wives. And as a result, he apparently neither liked the direction in which his intellectual property was headed, nor had much say in the matter. I know Wikipedia isn't exactly the scholarly place to direct folks to learn more, but they do have a pretty good write-up, with footnotes even. My takeaway was that Addams didn't feel truly satisfied with the 1960s TV series, as it was quite firmly settled in situation comedy territory. Addams' humor was sly and macabre, the TV sitcom was zany, and there were consequences. Apparently the New Yorker didn't want to be associated with the TV show, so put a ban on further Addams Family-specific panel cartoons. There was apparently a musical. There's always a musical these days. If there's popular media, they have to find a way to put it on the stage. I have neither seen nor heard much about it, save for its existence. I remember a Canadian TV sitcom production in the 90s. John Astin joined the cast as the grandparental figure, and it's where my website address of inkyblack.net comes from. There was an episode where Morticia takes up interior design and asks someone if they want something in black on black or inky black. The series was mostly forgettable. I think it aired on YTV up here, which would be likened to a poor man's Nickelodeon. Canadian TV tries. It's very earnest and exceptionally recognizable. There's something about it that either hits or misses by a wide margin. Comment down below if you want a crafty deep dive into the weird Canadian TV landscape. Seriously, it's more than Murdoch Mysteries and the 1980s Anne of Green Gables franchise. You'd be surprised how many shows tie back to my humble northern home, particularly fantasy and science fiction. More recently, the Addams family returned to the theater with an animated movie and sequel, which apparently didn't fare very well. I remember seeing trailers for it, but I didn't see it, and it didn't really interest me when it came onto streaming. I think it was mostly a casualty of the pandemic, but you could also argue that with the movie industry relying more and more on the hopeful safe bet of franchises, rather than original material that appeals to a wide audience, folks just get tired and wait until something actually tweaks their fancy. And that brings us to 2022's Wednesday. The basic premise of the show? Wednesday and conventional public school don't mix, so our girl is sent to Morticia and Gomez's alma mater, Nevermore Academy. She makes friends and rivals, sometimes both at once. She has to deal with folks who knew her parents when they were her age and has to confront conflicting feelings of being compared to her mother and wanting to be her own person. It's a fun show. And it's full of crafty wardrobe choices from a checkerboard sweater vest to a crocheted collar and cuffs. Not to mention Wednesday's colorful roommate Enid is a crafter who presses her work on the people around her. Very relatable, as most of my fellow knitters and crocheters have a tendency to want to share. It's because if we didn't, we'd be swamped into the sheer amount of stuff we can produce in a year if we're given free rein in the yarn store and don't have to find interesting camera angles. The series is good. It keeps the story relatively simple and relies heavily on a lot of settings, situations, and tropes that have become popular over the past 30 years since the Raul Julia Angelica Houston movies came out. There's a magical boarding school for those folks who want their Harry Potter-ish universe without the added problematic author. Tim Burton does generally have a bit of a diversity issue when it comes to his productions. Nevermore Academy, however, seems to have a little bit of everything. Could it use more diversity? Always. But for a first season of a show clutching onto the hope of being a sure thing because franchise? Could be worse. Let it walk before it has to run, right? Considering most of Burton's characters fall in the pale and tragic category, even the smallest addition of melanin is notable. More, please. It has the Odd Couple vibe of two roommates who are polar opposites. The colorful, outgoing character who runs the school gossip rag when she's not crocheting trendy accessories, contrasted against the somber, introverted cellist and aspiring pulp detective novelist, dressed in monochrome neutrals. Witches? Check. Werewolves? Check. Mermaids with an edge? Also check. And there's the requisite love triangle, possibly doomed romances, and the boy who will probably grow up to be the coolest of them all, but is currently the nerd. And the only person willing to take care of the school beehives, which turns out to be an ideal opportunity to escape the all-seeing eye of the school establishment. It also has Christina Ricci as the dorm mother. Terrifyingly wholesome until she isn't. Just a little background, the designer Eleanor Riego de la Branchaudière was kind of a crafting rock star of her time. I mean, you'd never know it because there's a lot more focus on knitting and the works of Miss Lambert and Jane Gauguin, but de la Branchaudière was right up there. She just concentrated more on tatting and crochet. If the little pictures of prize medals at the beginnings of her booklets are to be believed, she was an award-winning crafter, though for all I know this could have just been marketing copy. Riego, as she seems to have branded herself, was billed as a lace instructor. It shows in her work because most of the books or pamphlets I've found online outline a few specific projects you could make with some fairly simple motifs. She'd give directions for the motifs and then the directions on how to blend them together to make more complex pieces. She usually used knots to join things together. I prefer to figure out the pattern and then use the more modern method of using tatted joins. It's simpler, the piece is less likely to pucker, and most importantly, less likely to fall apart, particularly if you need to block it in any way. The project specifies coarse and fine threads. I'm using size 10 and size 20 Elizabeth Handy Hands in color 602 Natural. The seed beads that I'm going to be using are my own addition. The pattern specifies to leave a certain amount of thread between the motifs of the edging, and beads are not only really good spacers, they also add some bling and a bit of added structure when used the right way. I'm using a Handy Hands Moonlit shuttle in conjunction with a Clover-style plastic shuttle I purchased off Amazon in a cheap pack of 9 or 10. They're both lightweight shuttles. One has a tiny crochet hook on one end for pulling thread through the loops for joins or busting a knot apart if I have to pick back. The other has a little pick, which can also be pretty handy. I waited to start the collar in earnest until I was done the bodice, mostly because I wanted to get an idea of the size of the collar on the dress. I'm going to be pinning the tatted collar to the dress collar and wanted an idea of how long I needed to tat the edged motif around the back of the neck. Originally, I suspect a collar like this would have been pinned or sewn just on top of a blouse, more as a decoration around the neck. I'm not terribly worried about the tatted collar and the dress collar aligning exactly, mostly because the dress, as has been mentioned before, is black, and the dress color should kind of generally fade into the shadow of the greater dress. Like I said, I've been wanting to do this project for over a year, so I do have a tatted mock-up. I used Golo thread for this, and as you can see, the colors aren't exactly the same, though I think both threads were supposed to be from the same colorway. I wasn't too concerned because, like I said, mock-up. Blue and whatever color this is. Great. Oh yeah, that's vibrating. I did the mock-up using Riego's directions, and as you can see, and I'll do some close-up shots, there's some puckering and some places where the knots let go. I also don't really like the edging on the top of the collar. I mean, sure, you can run a ribbon through the loops to tie the collar around your neck, which I'm pretty sure was the original historical intention, but it feels rather simple and wimpy. Also, with being made last, you have to figure out where on the core motif to make your joins. There's another band motif in the same booklet from 1867 called the quatrefoil insertion that I think will look really nice on that top edge. I had started that motif before I put my tatting bag away so I could work on other projects. I also found that I'd made 2 of the half-star internal motifs. My plan at this time is to get the quatrefoil insertion to 18 inches, which is the length of the dress's collar at the neckband. Then I'll join on my half circle motifs while working the second half of the insertion. After that, I'll add the star motif to the half circle, which will mean that when I make my simple edging to form the bulk of the collar, I just have to join those motifs as I go. Hopefully that'll help bring it all together without a lot of puckering or being too fragile. The teeny tiny capsule definition of goth that is in no way 100% accurate or anywhere near an in-depth dissertation on historical gothic culture, for those who aren't aware, goth at its most 20th and 21st century basic is an offshoot of punk. A phrase I've often heard and reused is punk's prettier younger sister. That's it. When The Clash and the Sex Pistols were sowing chaos, Susie Sue, Bauhaus, and The Cure were dyeing their hair black, putting on far too much makeup, and using enough Aquanet to contribute to the hole in the ozone layer. Is that still a thing? Because when I was a teenager, it most definitely was a thing. It's why a lot of hairsprays these days are pump style rather than pressurized canisters. When I was growing up, the group of kids who wore a lot of black and listened to Morrissey were called morbids. That's the term my small town high school used. It is not indicative of any other locale. I wanted to be one of them, but my mother wouldn't let me wear black. And I was more a Duran Duran kind of girl. New Wave hit heavy rotation at one point, and Simon Le Bon was all over the place. Not so much Depeche Mode. But the morbids of my youth didn't have a lot of money to spend on high fashion. T-shirts, jeans. I think I knew 2 people who really embraced the aesthetic. One wore that Eurocentric style of trousers with the suspenders attached but falling from the hips rather than actually being used to hold his pants up. The other was a girl who wore a lot of layered black separates like tanks, tees, and skirts, and listened to a lot of Depeche Mode. Honestly, goals. When I got to college in the mid-90s, things started getting more expensive. I walked down Queen Street West in Toronto almost every single day on my way to the art college, and there were about 3 gothy boutiques that leaned heavily into the romantic goth aesthetics. Medieval to Victorian goth, lots of lace, lots of velvet, very expensive. I have a black velvet cloak from Pam Chorley's Fashion Crimes somewhere that I picked up on sale with birthday and Christmas money I saved for like 2 years. Bear in mind the kids waiting outside Sanctuary, a local goth club that was just up the street from where I lived at the time, wore whatever they could afford. And if you couldn't find black lipstick, eyeliner with some gloss over the top did the trick. You learned very quickly to stock up at the drugstore makeup counter at Halloween, and you had to be really choosy when it came to lipsticks and nail polish, because otherwise you just wound up with sheer gray lips and streaky nails. This was a time when Interview with the Vampire, The Crow, Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, directed by Kenneth Branagh, were a big deal, either in theaters or in video. And for the more whimsical side of things, yes, The Addams Family, starring Raul Julia, Angelica Houston, Christina Ricci, and Christopher Lloyd. If you watch Snappy Dragon's rundown on goth, yes, there were a lot of callbacks to the European Middle Ages and the Gothic Revival, but you had to have money to dress like this, and generally broke college students don't have that. It's after the 1990s that things start to get more fractured, commercialized, and plastic. Because every few years, someone realizes that witches and vampires and werewolves are cool, and we have another round of, is it subculture or is it merch? The 80s and 90s, throw it at the wall and see if it sticks flavor of morbid that listened to a gothic industrial cocktail of The Cure, Joy Division, Sisters of Mercy, I can never pronounce that, Front 242 and Skinny Puppy were not so much replaced as turned in with a hand-drawn facsimile for mall goth and mall punk, Green Day, buying your fishnets at Spencer's Gifts, and rolling your eyes when someone would inevitably ask if you listened to Marilyn Manson. It's less a matter of, hey, this is cool, how can I make it work for me, and more a matter of, are you Team Jacob, Team Edward, or Team Chocula? And if you got the answer wrong, prepare to get blasted. I never watched or read the Twilight series, by the way. It just didn't interest me. For the record, I have nothing against things that make teenage girls happy. I have more a problem with 30-something wine moms going gaga over characters portrayed as high schoolers. That was a very weird time to be alive. Watching Anne Rice get her nose bent out of shape because someone else had temporarily cornered the market on vampires was a whole vibe. I'd ask Bram Stoker, but I assume if he was alive, he'd be pissed off he couldn't get royalties for all the copies of Dracula bought in various fits of pique over the years. The fact is, a lot of goths were growing up and starting families, and in some cases, blending their dark and spooky look into severe corporate wardrobes. And the fun stuff we'd hacked together started appearing on fast fashion shelves, ready for us or the next generation to just snap it up. As an aside, I don't think this really equates to the look currently being advertised as whimsy goth. Some of it, sure, but a lot of that look also comes from late 90s to early 2000s fashion. Your Buffy the Vampire Slayer chic, Practical Magic, or The Craft all have that normal clothes that could trend spooky vibe to them on the right person, but look totally normal on the next, you know? It's how you accessorize, I guess. To bring it back to Wednesday Addams, as mentioned, Christina Ricci's portrayal of Wednesday falls in a very prime spot. In 1991, she was at that point where she was taking Loring's little girl and expanding the character. To be very fair, the 1991 movie is a wonderful example of a movie that reacquaints its older audience with the main characters, but also welcomes in the newer, younger audience as well, without talking down to anyone or ridiculing the original source material. If anything, it tries to pay homage to both the original TV series and the original panel comics. It's in the second movie that Ricci's Wednesday comes into her own. Exiled to summer camp, she has to fight for her individuality and that of the other outsider children who don't fit into the cheerful template forced onto them by the normal campers and the folks running the camp. We get to see the way she acts around other people, particularly the popular kids, and how she reacts to the status quo. To be very blunt, she and the other outsiders stage a revolution. Because this Wednesday is growing up, we're able to see the transformation, small as it is, from child to young adult. The dress, which was cute and childlike on Loring, is a little bit more fitted on Ricci. The hair is still in braids, but that's a trademark of the character. This Wednesday is a teenager. A young teen, sure, but a teenager. By the end of the movie, she even has a budding romance. The 1991 movie was on the forward edge of the spooky and supernatural trend that would continue in Dracula in 1992, then feed into Addams Family Values, Hocus Pocus, The Crow, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. By the mid-90s, we were passing from aging 80s icons such as Michael J. Fox in The Frighteners, and Bruce Willis, Meryl Streep, and Goldie Hawn in Death Becomes Her, and starting to skew the protagonists younger. There's a bit of a through line from Christina Ricci's Wednesday to Sarah Jessica Parker's corseted Sarah Sanderson to The Coven and The Craft, and then onwards to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, TV series less the somewhat forgettable movie, Charm, and the various schlock horror series of the mid to late 90s like Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer. So in a very real way, Ricci's Wednesday Addams is at the forefront of the mass media trend of pale girls dressed in black. I mean, if you disregard Winona Ryder in 1988's Beetlejuice. Again, since the 1991 Addams Family movie is technically a reboot, you could just say that Ricci's Wednesday is an extension of Loring's from the 60s. Might be a stretch, but it could be done. It was another similar time of fascination with friendly occult characters. The Munsters, Bewitched, I Dream of Jeannie. Maybe Beetlejuice was an outlier. It totally wasn't an outlier. You can track an undercurrent of gothic slacker culture from David Bowie's gothy vampire movie The Hunger in 1983, through Tom Cruise and Mia Sara's Legend in 1985, to Henson's Labyrinth in 86, and in almost everything Winona Ryder did in the late 80s through mid-90s. Mostly with Tim Burton, but I'll tack Heathers on there because my teenage angst has a body count. Obviously, one could argue that Morticia Addams and Lily Munster were the original goth girls, but they were quite firmly in the mom category. And there's an acronym you use to describe such sexy beasts that I don't think I can say on YouTube. Folks who know, fill in the folks who don't, or don't. I don't want to get demonetized for a sewing video. Burton's Wednesday, or Jenna Ortega's, however you want to differentiate them, is a logical step forward. The attitude is a continuation of Ricci's Wednesday, and the style draws heavily on dark academia and a touch of emo. I'd be surprised if it didn't, considering it's set at a magical boarding school. I wouldn't be surprised if, in the next season that should be airing in 2025, we'll see touches of whimsy goth, though it's also possible the design team in the wardrobe department will come up with something entirely new. We've already seen how they draw on traditional handicrafts to make the character wardrobes more personal and relatable. Maybe even a tatted collar? It could happen. Is Wednesday the original goth girl? Probably not, but she's definitely had a part in making the look more acceptable to the mainstream. Progress rather than perfection, right? You may have noticed a pink towel off to the side in my earlier footage, and that's because one of the kittens broke a leg. So our cream-colored menace has been benched by the vet until her leg heals up. She's in a crate so she doesn't move around too much and make the problem worse. The good news is that she's had her 4-week x-rays and things are on the mend, so she's been downgraded from a plastic splint to a stabilizing bandage. She has a heating pad, and I took a little time to crochet another cat mat for inside her kitty bed, so she's toasty and warm if a little bit bored. Silver lining, if we have to travel with the cats, we're now set. There's the wire crate down here with a litter box, as well as a soft-sided crate upstairs. As for the outfit, I really do need to remember that making my own lace takes time, especially when I'm modifying a pattern. It is essentially the same lace patterns as described in the original tatting booklet. I just used a couple of alternate techniques to put it all together. And a different beading lace pattern at the neck, though it came from the same booklet. Mix and match, you know? That did cause an issue or two because the joins between the beading and the simple edging didn't match up the way the original beading lace would have. Not really a problem since I'm tacking the two collars together, but if I wanted to wear the lace collar separately, I'd want to make sure the internal sections of the edging between the joins aren't able to flop or fold in the wrong direction. I'd want to somehow stabilize it. But otherwise it looks fantastic. The beads add just the right amount of bling, and because the two thread gauges are the same color, everything looks intentional. And I love the motif of the band that replaced the beading. It reminds me of Celtic knotwork. Absolutely perfect. Collar and dress together took a little bit of work. The collar possibly could have been lightly starched, but I didn't want to reduce the shine of the seed beads. Lace also has a tendency to stretch, so making sure the collar worked with the dress collar was fun. As I previously mentioned, the historical collar tied around the neck using ribbon threaded through the beading lace edge. Thinking about that, the project might have been easier if I'd just made a collar stand like on my Garibaldi shirt, rather than putting a full collar on the stand. Then I could have just used the collar in its original context. Possibly with a cameo at the throat instead of a bow, bears thinking about for future projects, either done historically or hacking a pattern. Either taking the collar off the Jenna or making another hacked Garibaldi dress. Either way, there are options now that the collar's done. Modifications on the dress. I sewed the front button placket shut to a certain point on the bust. I also installed snaps for the two buttons that required buttonholes, because if you can avoid buttonholes, why not? Someday I'll get some black snaps and swap them in so they're less obvious, but for now, I'm happy. I also didn't want buttonholes on my sleeve cuffs, so once again, I sewed them shut when I sewed the buttons on. There's plenty of space to fit my hand through the cuffs, so there wouldn't be any need to open or close them. I considered omitting the tower placket on the sleeve and just making a plain cuff, but this at least gives the illusion of a somewhat tailored shirt sleeve. And if I decide to make the matching cuffs to go with the collar, there's something here to pin them on. I did a machine sewn hem with a little bit of grosgrain ribbon. I wanted it to be something fun that only I would really see. The polka dots are just a little added whimsy and kind of a nod to how Wednesday's dresses aren't usually solid black, but often black with a small print. Normally, unless specified by the pattern, I prefer to hand sew my hems, but with the thread being black and the fabric being likewise black and covered in a thread pattern, I kind of just threw caution to the wind and said to heck with it. Don't regret it for an instant. If I recall correctly, I chose a size 2X for the outfit, and that's because that's what was supposed to fit my bust, and I possibly could have gone down a size. I don't think I've particularly shrunk since cutting out the dress, but I haven't gained any inches either though. October is a rather high-calorie month in Canada. Thanksgiving plus Halloween tends to do that. November, ditto. Cold weather and comfort carbs mostly. We didn't get into the Halloween candy and we gave the rest to the last kids of the night. That said, there's plenty of room in the bust, waist, and hips. I think I added an inch or two in the length of the bodice because my side or torso measurement was a little bit longer than stated in the pattern instructions. The waist is hitting just a little bit low, and I'm not sure if that's by design or by my own misadventure. If it's by design, if I managed to get the proportion right for the torso, then that would explain why there aren't any side pockets included, because the pockets I added are a wee bit low. That said, I have pockets. Big ones. Gonna use them. Next time I probably won't modify for length and just go with whatever the standard length of the bodice is. That would probably put the pockets in the right place. The fabric is rather poofy, so while I pressed most of my seams, they do puff up a bit. And this is really noticeable in the skirt gathering, and the waistline looks a little bit wonky. I first tried the dress on with a pair of jeans underneath, and I could really feel the extra bulk of the fabric at the waist seam. That said, the fabric is warm. Breathable, but warm. Or maybe it's just warmer because the sleeves are long and the fabric feels a bit thicker due to the gauze effect. Either way, I regretted taking it off after the first try on because while it's super comfortable, I didn't want to accidentally spill dinner on it. It's already proving to be a cat hair magnet. We originally intended to get black cats, which likely would have worked with my and the husband's mostly black wardrobes, but the fates gave us adorable cream and gray cats. So no matter what color or neutral hued clothing we purchase, we're screwed. I guess we'll just be investing in lint rollers. And for anybody who is wondering, do I love the dress and/or collar? Yes, both. The dress is fantastic, and while it's loose, it still has some structure so it doesn't feel like I'm wearing a tent dress. I'm still getting used to making dresses from a pattern that fit loose and aren't at the very end of a sizing chart or graded up a size or two using my best guess. Feels weird, but also good. I love tatting, and I've made a bunch of doilies. I call them anxiety doilies because they're great for keeping my hands busy when I'm feeling a bit nervous. And the bigger you make them, the longer your pattern repeat goes, so you can memorize things in relatively small chunks. The problem with doilies is unless you're going for a very handmade, lace-heavy, possibly granny core or maybe great granny core aesthetic, there's not much call for them aside from amusement. So having a decorative tatted piece I can bolt onto a piece of clothing is fantastic. I mean, you could probably wear the collar sans shirt or with as minimal a shirt as possible, but then we'd not be on YouTube but another platform entirely. Fact remains, having a semi-practical use for my tatting is nice. And if you're a tatter who's interested in the doily patterns I'm using, I'll have a link to the designer's YouTube channel in my description because I don't want to butcher the pronunciation of their name. If you're looking for good how-to information for standard tatting, they're one of my go-to sources. Anyhow, the weather's getting chilly and I need to go make a few cozy things.